I think it's safe to say that from country to country, from studio to studio, and even from person to person, the terms used to describe various parts of the CG production pipeline can vary quite a bit, something that can oftentimes lead to quite a bit of confusion. And so, before we start in this exercise, let's just make very clear exactly what it is that I mean when I talk about environment versus asset texturing. Environment texturing, then, is a term that can be thought of as referring to generic textures in a level that can, and oftentimes are, applied to multiple objects at a time, oftentimes being tiled and blended in order to create the look and feel of the general environment. So, a grass lawn, a brick wall, a concrete partition, and so on. Many of these typically being large surfaces that contain no specific details in and of themselves, being just, as I said, generic environment textures. An asset texture, by way of contrast though, is a unique texture that will typically be applied only to one or two objects in the level. For example, if we were to texture a chair such as we see here, it would most likely be created as just a single, unique object material. Even if we had a second chair in order to create a set here, we would probably still want the second texture to contain some unique elements, even though we may use the original chair's texture as a starting point. Because these textures would have specific details built into them, the bitmaps obviously couldn't be applied to any other static mesh in the scene that doesn't contain the same polygon count and or UV layout as this chair, locking the texture, as we say, to either this or a duplicate asset. The best way to approach texturing an object like this, for me then, is to create what I call environmental textures that can be used anywhere in the scene, so a generic wood and a generic fabric, etc., that can be applied to any model, and then use instances of those generic textures as the base from which to create an asset-specific texture for this chair, with asset-specific details such as wear and tear being added afterwards. The beauty of this approach being that we can, of course, shave quite a bit of time off the texture creation process on a project. And we can also ultimately create a huge library of generic materials for ourselves from which we can draw at any time.